Welcome to the ASPR podcast Inside Conflict with Moritz Ehrmann.
So welcome to this second episode of ASPR's podcast Inside Conflict. And today we are going to talk about a conflict context that has evoked probably more attention than any other conflict in recent history, namely the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, also widely considered as one of the world's most intractable conflicts. Numerous efforts to find a sustainable agreement between the parties have failed, despite high-profile international efforts, diplomatic pressure, and both state-led mediation efforts and a wide range of unofficial track conflict transformation effort. This does not mean, however, that the conflict is frozen in place. It remains highly dynamic, and new realities emerge. At the same time, there is a need to better understanding the reasons for past failures for resolving the conflict and possible ways forward. Over the course of the next parts of Inside Conflict, we will be discussing with our guests several different perspectives that can provide us some insights to conflict dynamics, with an emphasis on identity-related matters, religious and secular, national and regional, which seem to have played a prominent role. With an eye to such elements, we will discuss current politics in Israel, its impact on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and on peacemaking efforts. So today I have the great pleasure of being here with Ofer Salzberg, who is the director of the Middle East program at the Herbert C. Kellman Institute. He is an Usher PhD fellow at Trinity College Dublin, where he focuses on how conflict resolution addresses sanctity. And he teaches at a religious secular Beit Midrash on the interplay between Jewish tradition and modern sovereignty. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much, Moritz. Likewise.
Then I also have the pleasure of being here today with Mr. Jeff Sohl, who is a lecturer on the practice of peace at Harvard Divinity School and the co-chair of the Peace Appeal, an international conflict transformation NGO. Good to be with you.
Likewise, thank you.
And then here's also with us Dr. Carlo Altrovandi, who is assistant professor in religions, conflict and peace studies at Trinity College Dublin. And his research focuses on the role of religion in Middle East politics and the Israeli-Palestinian peace processes.
Hello. Hi.
So coming to our first question in this episode of ASPR Inside Conflict, focusing on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, let us turn to probably the most significant recent development, which have been the establishment of a new government in Israel. Namely, of course, a coalition government that is probably unlike any other coalition elsewhere in the world. And that, of course, brought an end to Israeli politics dominated by Benjamin Netanyahu, and which, of course, brought together different sides that would usually be in opposition. So, can you help us make sense of this unique composition of the new Israeli government? Who would like to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. Thank you very much. The coalition is made up of 8 different political parties. As you said, they are extremely heterogeneous ideologically and in terms of their constituencies, left-leaning and right-leaning, secular and religious, more socialist, more capitalist, a Palestinian Arab party, a pro-settler party, pro-two-states parties, and really there are numerous contradictions within the coalition. And at the same time, despite this high heterogeneity, many parts of Israel are actually excluded from the coalition. It's often missed from the outside. So all of the ultra-Orthodox parties sit outside of the coalition. Likud, Israel's largest party, is outside of the coalition, and the most conservative parts of religious Zionism are outside. And this is a unique thing in two senses. First, this is the first time that Israel has a coalition in which an Arab party is a member of the coalition, of the governing coalition. And not only that, it is a party that when you go to their offices, you see on the wall the poster of Hassan al-Banna, founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they do this in a government led by the former Director General of the Yesha Council, the most significant pro-settler body in Israel. And secondly, it's unprecedented in the sense that it has such a high degree of heterogeneity that it needs to learn one crucial thing. How can you design policies in a way that works for people with very different values, very different beliefs? And if you don't learn how to operate this muscle, then most probably this coalition will collapse. It has 61 out of 120 members of the Knesset, of the Israeli parliament, and it's enough for one or two of them to pull out the plug and the whole building collapses. This is where we are for now.
Jeff, would you like to add anything to this indeed very interesting and yet so complicated setup that you find currently in the Israeli government?
Well, I'm an outsider to the context, obviously, but I've spent many years working with insiders on conflict resolution activities there. I think it's undeniably an extremely interesting development. It, as Ofer just mentioned, there's a broad diversity of worldview perspectives in the coalition, and also many that are excluded. What seems new here is the sort of side-by-side collaboration among more religiously conservative parties, and it remains to be seen. But this is certainly a new and potentially promising development for long-term conflict transformation efforts. Past efforts to resolve the conflict have been less inclusive of such parties. So this is very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Carlo, what do you have to add to this discussion?
Not very much more, because I think already Jeff and Ofer already discussed the major development. I think it's very unprecedented also in view of the different worldviews represented in the government. So it is entirely unprecedented, and there might be potential that could reverberate on the peace process, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, this is to be hoped for. I mean, this element of having sort of both sides of the very extreme spectrum represented in one government. So the settlers on one side, and then an Arab Israeli party that has its root in as you mentioned, in the Muslim Brotherhood. This is, of course, something extremely interesting, and I mean, there's many other elements to this government, of course, many other sides, many other parties, but as you have pointed out, of course, this is, of course, a very interesting element to focus on. So maybe my next question would be, so sort of these two sides now being represented in one government, and having to try, of course, to come up with common solutions to the many problems that the country faces, like any other country, of course. What might this mean for the broader picture of Jewish Arab relations within Israel, and of course, especially against the backdrop of the violence that took place inside of Israel, sort of in the aftermath, or in the merge of the Gaza-Israel fighting last May. Ofer, you want to start again?
Sure. So we are seeing a massive change in terms of budget allocation as a result of this cooperation. Many parts of Israel's Arab communities have been neglected budget-wise and discriminated historically. And there is an effort now to rectify some of that, which I think is very significant. We see in particular an attempt to end the neglect of a criminal phenomenon that has developed in the last 20 years, in which there are more and more illegal firearms in the hands of Arab citizens of Israel, with very dire consequences for Arab society in Israel. We've seen gangs killing each other, and the police not doing enough, in fact, in order to curb this phenomenon. And we are seeing that these policies are also going to some extent to more symbolic achievements, that is to say, not only allocating money. This is perhaps most obvious in the way in which the government has recognized and legalized 3 hitherto unrecognized Bedouin villages in the Negev. And this resonates also within the Palestinian national perspective. And we will see whether more will take place, meaning whether more symbolic achievements will be accumulated. This will be crucial in terms of understanding whether Ra'am, the Arab Palestinian party that is in the coalition, will be viewed as having joined the coalition, an Israeli coalition, legitimized it, given more legitimacy to Israel, while it continues to control the West Bank and Gaza only for money. Or does it do it also to advance the Palestinian national cause? Does it do it also in alignment with Islamic principles? This is a decisive question. And on the side of the Jewish parties, we are seeing also that a taboo has been broken, I think, historically. It will be very difficult to put this sort of genie back into the box. We are in a situation in which both former Prime Minister Netanyahu and current Prime Minister Bennett and Lapid have given their support to a coalition in which there is an Arab party. And from that point of view, this is not just a historical moment, but probably a watershed in the history of Israeli politics. And the major challenge for these partners is to see whether they can really calm down these growing tensions between Arabs and Jews within Israel. I'm sure my colleagues can speak more about the importance of symbolic gestures, of all kinds of challenges that relate to mixed cities, to not mixed cities, to what happens when there are escalations outside. So I can just say, if they don't do this and there is another escalation, perhaps the entire coalition is in peril. If they do this, then also the future of not only this coalition, but Jewish-Arab cooperation in Israel would enjoy success.
Yeah. No, I just comment on Ofer because the last escalation in May was also had also reverberation within Israel, exacerbating a cleavage between Jewish community and Arab community. So I think that the new government might have an opportunity to address this cleavage within Israel. Mansour Abbas' agenda is really focused on tackling this important issue around social integration, social equality. So I think it might be an opportunity in disguise to tackle this.
I think this is a really important set of insights, and particularly, well, I mean, if we've just seen an example of how these parties at different ends of the spectrum supposedly can collaborate, as Ofer and Carlo are pointing out, we've also seen an example of how quickly it can devolve into violence, and that tends to happen around highly symbolic, elements of the conflict and the parties' understanding of themselves. And I think the parties need to work harder to understand that. And there's a symbiotic relationship between their cooperation and achievements on sort of more material, practical, mundane, on-the-ground things, and their attention to these symbolic flashpoints and issues. Well, they need to succeed on both fronts together, I believe.
Thank you very much. I mean, this was already a very interesting discussion and probably concludes our first part. We're going to talk a little bit more about peacemaking and how all of this, what all of this means for that, in the next part. So thank you very much for now.
Subscribe to our podcast or visit the website insideconflict.com. For more information about the work of the ASPR, visit aspr.ac.at. Until next time.